So yeah, without further ado, cool. So, sorry, there we go. So yeah, just wanted to give a brief overview of what I wanted to talk about today. So first, just want to talk about a little bit about myself and Nen and how I got started with that. But then I really want to dive deep into this idea of networks, which I find really, really interesting and I've been thinking about for some time. Specifically want to talk about the idea of information brokers, how referrals work, that last 5% on any project, superconnectors, and how exposure matters. Cool, so first, just a bit about myself. So I grew up in the Jersey suburbs, still recovering from that a little bit. As you can tell, it was it's nice, but I remember we saw like deer and geese in the backyard, but it was really sterile in some ways. I never really encountered design in the built environment, especially good design. And I didn't know what product design was until pretty late in high school. But when it came time to apply, and when I got to design school, I felt like the blinders kind of were off. And I was beginning to see the world really differently and my place in it. And I remember when I got there, when I got to design school, discovering design almost felt like finding out that you could fly in some ways, even though it was wobbly, you're probably going to crash, and you should probably learn how to fly first. It's really hard to not try. So I remember my first and second years of college, I scoured Dribble, Upwork, Fiverr, everything. Eventually I found a super random gig on Handshake, and it was for a Pittsburgh-based water treatment company. Not the most exciting thing, but it got me started. And I remember I was just so hooked from the first day. Little did I know at the time, but that was kind of the first node in my professional network. And as I kind of went through college, I did a lot of internships, some contracting work here and there, and then eventually co-founded this startup. And that just kind of started to build my network over time. And that's really what I want to discuss today. A little bit about how networks shaped me and Nen Creative. And when we first started out, so I started Nen Creative when I left Arkin in April of 2022. And really, when I first started, I felt very lonely. There was only a couple of connections I had here and there, some through startup, some through schoolwork. And it felt really difficult, especially when you hear about stories of people doing 10 years at an agency, then doing their own thing, or doing their consultancy gig, working in tech first. But it was really that study of how networks work that really helped us grow really quickly into in a really competitive space. So this is just some of the clients I work with today since our founding last summer. So really quick, just a little bit about our work we do today. So we do a lot of end-to-end work, a lot of different verticals, a lot of different styles. In addition to product design, we do branding, websites, packaging, marketing, strategy. At any given point in time, we were working on 6 to 12 projects at once. And I think that's really been the most fun part of it, the ability to see, almost like traveling. Like I don't want to settle down right now, but I get to see the world in a way, rather than work on one thing concretely. So that's been the most fun thing for sure. And so back to the idea of networks, it's kind of this, in my eyes, this secret sauce in doing creative studios or really any type of creative work. And honestly, I think it's has implications far beyond that as well. When I was at a startup, we leveraged a lot of traditional marketing techniques, SEO, advertisements, stuff like that. But at an agency, especially starting where I started out, these channels just were not very effective for me and for our team. So, for example, a Nike executive is not going to be seeing your ad and reaching out or posting their job on LinkedIn or other platforms for this project. So when I embarked on this journey, realized how important building networks were, but more specifically building diverse networks, which I'll get into in a second. So I really often think about this example. I first learned about this in college. I've think about this a lot since. But it's the example of Paul Revere and William Dawes. You're probably wondering who the person on the right is. But for those who don't know, Paul Revere and William Dawes both rode on horseback to avert the American colonial militia about the arrival of the British and the start of the American Revolutionary War. Well, you only remember Paul Revere because he was able to cultivate a really diverse network, which word expanded outwards. William Dawes did not. So when he told someone, they told someone else who told the same group of people again and again. So unfortunately, yeah, that's why we don't know who William is. But what it really gets to is the study of information brokers. And there's a lot of really good reading on this as well. And it's really about how information brokers not only get more recognition, but get more opportunities. When I first started NEN, I had a really hard time getting clients for several months, and I realized in order to change the outcomes, I needed to change the variables, so playing on a different playing field in some regards. And it wasn't just reaching out to or building communities and networks, building networks within the communities I was already a part of. A lot of it was reaching out to people in communities I wasn't really comfortable with initially or wasn't a part of. And that's a large reason why we do so much work across so many different domains today. And a lot of that is part of that initial shift when we were first starting out. And you can see this a lot today. If you just go on Twitter, design Twitter, you'll see the same people. I think I tried this a couple times, competing for the same projects, and it's really hard. For me, the goal of starting a studio was to exit the rat race, but it felt like just another kind of rat race in some regards. And so, in order to kind of break free, it once again comes back to this idea of networks and how you empower yourself to do what you love. And I think it applies to other areas as well, whether it's getting a dream job as a designer, or whether it's maybe hopefully giving an insightful talk so far at this meetup. Everything kind of comes back to this idea of diversifying your network in order to yield more opportunities. And so on that, there's this really cool insight that we found, the idea of referral chains. So about 90%, maybe more, of our projects are through referrals, and not just direct referrals, but at this point, starting this summer, most of our clients, or a good chunk of them, are 3 to 4 links away from the original referee at this point. In order to kind of build that, I found that there isn't necessarily like a factual reason, but I found that there's this idea of like crossing a threshold, doing that last 5% on anything. It's so crucial to being able to build these sustaining chains consistently. And I do think it's pretty universal. It's what I look for when I'm hiring designers or evaluating projects or etc. And just a couple examples. So this is one brand identity we did very early on. And at this point, the client was happy, we were happy with it, but we wanted to bring it to 100%, just do that last 5%. And so we cleaned up the type a bit, added in some animations, developed a blur gradient that could fade and move as well. And then that really got us to a point where the client was, wow, raving about it, and it helped us a lot. Here's another example of a package we're working on right now, where we just couldn't find good photos of a lot of these elements, like honeysuckle, goji berries, I don't know, can't find it on Adobe stock. So we went out to Chinatown and brought a lot of those ingredients and took photos ourselves. That's me in my apartment trying to make a photo rig work. And then the last thing is, it doesn't just apply to the work, I think it applies to the mentality as well. So this was probably our 3rd or 4th project, but really early, we had barely a website up, almost nothing really, and we were competing against 40 some other bids at that point, but it was just like kind of doing things that other people may not do. So I remember getting this email in bed, I was like, oh, I gotta get on this call today, right now. And like 2 minutes later, like at my desk, taking the call, and that helped us land that project, which is still one of our biggest and my most favorite projects today. So yeah, moving on. There's this idea of superconnectors too, which I find really fascinating. And so it's the idea that when you have a network, not all nodes in that network are built equally. Superconnectors are people who have really rich, diverse networks that they share with other people. And superconnectors, in fact, originate the majority of our initial referrals. And if you do the tree connecting back, maybe like 80–90% of them come from just a few nodes, superconnectors. And the cool thing about them is they not only they also put in a good word when we're trying to win a really large contract, the one I mentioned prior. They helped us put a good word in, and even when we're developing chains that don't connect through the superconnector per se. In this example, we're working with an e-commerce founder who's many referrals away, but the investor, who's a superconnector in this case, actually invested in that company. And that helped us navigate that relationship a lot smoother. I think my advice here is, I think when we're in the tight spot, something that I've noticed really helps is, well, taking a step back, we're sometimes in tight spots, but regardless of that, we always make sure to prioritize people who have helped us a lot and given a lot to us. And I find that to be really, really important in kind of maintaining those relationships as well. And I think it applies, I've seen this apply, I've applied this kind of insight into other areas of my life as well. Professional, but also personal. So prioritizing the people that are important to me and going above and beyond always makes a really big difference. And the last kind of general idea is this idea of exposure. So exposure, similar to ideas, are only as strong as their marketing. And exposure doesn't necessarily mean that you need to become a LinkedIn influencer or start a newsletter. I think that's something I thought for a really long time. I remember when I was first starting out, I was trying to learn how to use Twitter. Not great. But I found that exposure in my own, I found how to cultivate exposure in my own way, which is just to provide value for others, be nice, show up when you need to show up. And I found that the quality of interactions often trumps the quantity. So doing things sincerely without expectation of return is always, I think, a good way to operate, and it's how we operate as well. And oftentimes, I think it works out for the better. So this is an example of, I remember when we were first starting this summer, this was in July, I think, beta testing one of Founder's app. And I remember I wrote up a really long note. I think it was too much at the time, but I sent it, and then many months later they reached out. Right now we've been working with them for 4 to 5 months. So yeah, classical, do things that don't scale, be genuine, and it tends to work out. So yeah, I think that's the end. Hopefully that was insightful, and thank you.
Questions for Jason?
Given where you're at now, like what's next? What's 2023? Do you want to keep growing it more? Do you want to refine what you've already got? Like based on this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think honestly, I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out, to be honest. But I think in 2022, something I didn't really cover was we made a lot of mistakes early on. Didn't get time to cover everything, but towards the end of 2022, typically in the winter months, business slows down a bit. Took some time to start developing these processes internally. Trying to be careful about overdoing it, but putting a lot of processes in who do we want to work with, what type of work do we want to do, what are we prioritizing, work-life balance within our team, stuff like that. And so I kind of see 2023 as building on top of that, building on that foundation. And really, for lack of a better word, just like cutting out things that don't matter. So the clients that we, for the work that we don't like doing per se, and for the clients who may not bring us happiness, for lack of a better word, again, trying to focus in on the things that matter to us, what we want to do, and stuff like that.
Was there ever a point in time where you hit a rock bottom or you doubted yourself, like starting then? And how'd you bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a lot of months it was really tough to make rent. Probably quitting immediately was not the best idea to do this. I would say, you know, we didn't really pick up for, so started doing a little bit of preliminary work to pay rent and stuff in April, but it didn't really pick up until maybe like August, September. Even then, supporting a team I think is really hard as well. So we have a couple people we work with. So making sure that they're prioritized over myself. So there's a lot of times that in the beginning that I wasn't able to get paid and stuff, right? And that was really tough. But I think the thing that keeps me going at the end of the day is I don't do it for money. I just do it because I really like doing a lot of work. That's the thing I don't. Not a lot, that sounds bad, but I like doing a lot of different type of work. So I could never, I mean, I did internships in a sense. It was just working on the same product. A lot of times really, maybe like large impact, but low agency, low variety. So I think that keeps you going, the ability to just do good work. And the good thing about working for yourself in some regards is when you pay rent, I will work more. I can control my destiny in some way. Yeah.
Is that a raised hand or are you?
This is not a great question, but I'm just curious, is the name Nen created, like, is Nen from the anime Hunter x Hunter off the power system?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it's an amazing name. Okay.
Thank you.
It's a great power system.
It is, I think, yeah, that's why we settled on it.
Who's your favorite character? Good question.
It might be a hot take. I really like the Miriam, the King character. I thought that was the best arc, the Chimera Ant arc, for sure.
How do you suggest we approach networking from this point forward if we're new to New York?
Great question. I remember I moved to New York in October of, it's about a year and a half ago, I would say. And I remember it was really hard for me to get started, especially because I left the startup I was at just a couple months after I moved. I recommend going to events like this. I remember I went to a ton, especially in the summer. It picks up quite a bit. But the other thing I found, and I think I found this in college as well, is just reaching out. People are really receptive and nice. I'm like very concerned. I was really concerned early on. I was like, I don't want to email people. I don't want to DM people. I tend to be a little shy. Growing up was really shy, I would say. But I think in college, and as I've been doing this especially, building confidence to reach out and finding that people are really nice and kind when you ask for help or when you have questions, getting coffee chats, stuff like that. I would definitely recommend that.
As a follow-up to that, if you're reaching out to someone, would you suggest being more confident in your outreach or more humble in your outreach?
Ooh, it's good. I think because I've been in, I guess also part of the reason why I left, but the startup space I think teaches you to be like super confident, provide value first, and then looking for requests. I mean, I think there's merit in something like that. But I think in the design space, if you try to network within the design space, I would say people are really nice. I would say just be very, the one thing I will take from the startup space that I think is relevant is be concise with what you want. I think sometimes, for example, myself, like I sometimes get inquiries and stuff. It's really hard when it's not direct. I want to help, but sometimes if it's like very wishy-washy or not really sure what I can do, it makes it a lot harder and drags it out longer. So just being direct, and if you were to lean to one, probably more on the humble side, I would say. Yeah.
Who's the one with mine?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, excuse me, who was mine? Good evening. Thank you for spending your time listening to me. My name is Zara, but I wanted to ask, I guess, similar to Bird, but more directed towards you when you were first reaching out to people as, a brand yourself, per se. How would you say that you provided or try to express the fact that you had value as a startup? Like what, I know it's still like a younger startup, but I'm very curious to know, how did you go like, okay, this is how we, this is how I differentiate and this is why you choose me, basically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It reminds me of, I worked on, like LA Tech Week was one of the events we worked on pretty early. And I remember I started working on the event, I would go to the event, and I would get shut down so often. But I think when I do pitch at events or on meetings, I think a lot of what you can offer when you're early on, whether you're an individual designer or a new studio, is you can just out-hustle the other, I don't want to use that word per se, but you can just outdo, work more, do whatever, do the things that people won't do. An established agency is not going to be responding to an email at 1 a.m. or staying up really late to do something or getting something done or always attentive. So I remember our first few clients, and even today we carry this throughout, still, is just going above and beyond. Like, I think that's something that people value, and it's why I would say, honestly, most of our initial clients, even a lot of them today, work with us because of that reason. Yeah.
Hey Jason, I just want to say thanks for sharing your story. A lot of insights, really inspiring. I think in the middle you mentioned quality, interaction trumps quantity. So could you maybe elaborate on that, like how networking or meeting people have given you value into like your own research and your own approach process?
Yeah, because of the work we're doing now, I've been to more networking events than I'd like to admit, and tech events and stuff like that. But I remember, like most people, and I don't expect most people to remember me. So I think that's kind of where the idea of like quantity doesn't do much, but the connections, like the example showed earlier, the connections that do matter, and I find that help a lot, are things that are more genuine, not scripted per se, and just once again, it's the kind of thing going above and beyond always. And when you do choose, when you do want to talk to someone, make an effort, right? It's a lot better to make an effort. For example, if you're applying to a company, I would say going that above and beyond on one application or 5 applications is better than maybe hitting apply to 20, right? I think that's kind of how we approach it, more or less.
All right, any last questions? All right, thank you, Jason.